Hello, dear class. Well, as you can see, I'm in my car, which is a strange place for me to be sending you a video from. But as I mentioned, I think in a couple of emails, we haven't had the internet since the storm, although we're getting it back tonight. Thank goodness. They're going to come and look after us. And so I've had to go to the library where I park outside the library where I am now. You see the occasional bit of traffic going by behind me, and now I've got Wi-Fi. Rather exciting. So I wanted to say a word or two to you about Under the Volcano before we let it go. If you've been able to get through it, I know it's a difficult book, and my sympathies are with those of you who haven't been able to get through it, who've had a hard time with it, or who have battled your way through it, but hope never to hear its name spoken again. I'm thinking now, starting nowhere in particular, of the fact that a favourite author of mine called Christopher Caldwell, not called with an L, but Cord with a C-A-U-D. Christopher Caldwell, a left-wing writer, a communist writer of the 1930s, interesting theorist of literature, very powerful writer, author of a novel as well called This My Hand. And he died at the Battle of the Ebro. The battle that's taking place while the book takes place, and while the consul battles for his own soul, and Hugh battles to decide whether he's doing the right thing by riding a munitions boat all the way back from Veracruz in Mexico up to help the beleaguered Republicans, the loyalists in Spain, who are steadily losing ground to the Franco supporters, the fascists, who indeed are going to win. So Caldwell, maybe on this very day, not a man of arms, but a man of heroism, like others, John Cornford, a number of famous British intellectuals who joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade and other forces on behalf of the Republicans in the not the rebels. They're not the rebels. The rebels are the other side. The Republicans are the actual government, who went and fought for the leftists, the communists, and the anarchists against Franco's forces. And many of the things about the Spanish Civil War resonate in the memory once you've spent some time with it. Abajo la inteligencia! ¡Es viva la muerte! A great battle cry of, I don't know, the anarchists possibly. And down with intelligence, long live death. Many other famous battle cries and many other things of importance about the Spanish Civil War. However, that's the one I always think of. Abajo la inteligencia! The Battle of the Ebro, carefully chosen, as I've asked you to tell me why that battle. I've asked you in the quiz why Lowry chose that particular battle to be the day on which his central character battles for his life, for his existence, for his future, for his ability to find a reason to stop drinking, or at least a reason to persuade his now ex-wife Yvonne to return to him and stay. The Day of Days and the Day of the Dead in Mexico. Very important event. If you ever go to Mexico, you will never forget the Day of the Dead, in which there are many celebrations and much art that belongs specifically to the Day of the Dead, with which you'll be surrounded, and some of which they will want you to purchase. So here we are on the Day of the Dead, and it turns out, for those of you who got to the end, I shouldn't give away who dies, but it is a Day of the Dead. So in the quiz, I've asked you to consider the importance given to this book by the central character's inability to find a reason to live sanely, live soberly, or live anywhere in particular. He's been a traveller, and his little brother Hugh has been the same in the consul's footsteps, and both of them travelling in the author's, Malcolm Lowry's, own footsteps at sea, like a number of distinguished writers of the early to mid 20th century. Eugene ONeill, who went to sea, sailed aboard a steamer to Santiago in Chile, and wrote about it, as all intellectuals who go to see young men seeking experience, they certainly find enough of it to write about. Although Hugh's description, we don't get the consuls, but Hugh's description of it is interesting and maybe closer to the truth of Lowry's description than you get, for instance, in O'Neill's play Long Day's Journey into Night, where there's an epic description of what it's like to be up in the crow's nest, atop the mast, gazing out across the infinite sea, and the ecstasy and exhilaration of this. But Hugh has a very different story to tell, as you will notice if you get there, about the extraordinary tedium and drabness and disappointment and ordinariness, and more than that, the kind of surprising bourgeois delights of being on a steamer in those days, a commercial, the merchant marine, not a heroic vessel at all, but one on which the food, Hugh insists, and it must be true, because nobody could have invented this if they hadn't experienced it themselves, the food is extraordinarily good. Who could have thought that would be the case on a steamer where you get 5 course breakfasts, according to you? Seems unlikely, doesn't it? But on the other hand, it seems compellingly likely, because you just think, well, yes, after all, Lowry was there. No one could have invented this if it wasn't actually, or put this into a novel if it wasn't in fact true. And the library, an extensive library? What? A library on a steamer hauling who knows what kind of hemp or indigo or huge quantities of some tedious commercial substance, and they have a library there. And their time is spent disparaging the food, this wonderful food. And Hugh says that even he fell into the habit of disparaging the food, even though he knew perfectly well it was actually astoundingly good food. But he fell into the habit that everyone had of saying, oh God, when we get to shore we won't have to eat this swill anymore. It's totally counterintuitive, and you feel as you read it that it must derive from real experience. So I've asked you to consider the fame of the book lying as it does in the tremendous promise that the consul seems to contain humanly, a man of many talents, a man of great intellectual resources, infuriating for those of you who don't have the consul's knowledge base as far as literature is concerned, is endlessly quoting from a variety of languages. So the consul has the making of something substantial, you can't help feeling, and is throwing it down the drain. And why would this be a remarkable and interesting thing to do? Why would this lead to a piece of literature which is acclaimed among the great works of the century, and your feeling may be, having read it or having tried to read it, oh, come on. It took me a while to get to love the book, I have to admit. But I always claimed, and now I'm going to not, I'm not going to scratch my nose. This is a very impressive moment. I always thought it was because I have no great fondness. Well, I have a fondness for drunkards as such, but I haven't really got a great fondness for drink or the effect of drink on my dear friends who I've often carried home, literally. So I wasn't, at least they are my dear friends, whereas the consul is merely a figment of Malcolm Lowry's imagination. So why would I be prepared to tolerate his vices and his foibles and the sad story that is his? And there is a reason that other people cite. They feel that's precisely the point, that life has closed off the avenues for men of substance at a time leading to the Second World War, when indeed humanity seemed to be sinking, like the consul himself, down into a ravine full of stinking corpses. And in that sense, he might as well, our consul, have been the character of a well-educated noble German officer struggling with the awfulness of the world as he found it during the Second World War. Would have been another case in point. So I've left it to you to give me your thoughts on that premise. Similarly, I've asked you to consider how you feel about Hugh and his idealism and his, if you like, tragic heroism. I'm sorry, I'm scratching my face again, and I talk to my daughter every day. She's in Berlin on WhatsApp, and she says, She can see me. She sees me scratch my face. No. None of that bother. So Hugh is not really very far removed from the consul. There are times when he strikes me as being Lowry himself at an earlier stage, on the way to becoming the consul, perhaps. There's much of Lowry in Hugh and much of the consul in Hugh, which works perfectly well given that they are brothers. And I don't think he should be scolded for that. But the question of how you feel about that tragic idealism, that doomed idealism, is something that I would like to know at this moment in time. I, having grown up in an age where there were idealistic choices to be made after the Second World War, and socialists, and there were many of us in Europe, were making a choice of hope and trust in humanity, despite the horrors of the war and the dropping of the bomb and everything else. Now, a generation or two onwards, I think it's harder, and socialism itself is a wounded creed, and difficult to know whether idealism is anything other than doomed when you look around. So you may completely disagree with that, and I'm eager to hear your views. I'm eager to know whether you managed to get through this celebrated but very demanding book, and are ready to go on for a final dash through a much simpler read, George Orwell's 1984, which you may have read before, a more popular book, a more celebrated book, better known, and interesting to me, even more interesting from the point of view of your reaction in relating it to the present time. It's about Winston, who lives under a surveillance culture, as we now all do. We may have caught up at last with 1984, belatedly. enjoy, and stay safe, my dears.